I always tell people kids rise or fall based on your expectation. One of my favorite quotes came from Michelangelo. He said that the greater danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it.
You are now listening to the highlight reel builder for authors, the Going North podcast. I'm your host, best-selling author, and Maxwell Leadership Certified Trainer, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be getting some tips and techniques to advance yourself coming up next. Today's episode is sponsored by book number 2 from Dom Brightman, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. It is the field guide to help unleash the elite performer that is inside of you. Cop it today on Amazon.com or heading over to dombrightman.com and snag it in book, ebook, and audiobook, so that way you can take it on the go and get yourself on the go to your northbound success. And today on the highlight reel builder for authors known as the Going North podcast, we got another super special, awesome human for you today. That's right, indeed, courtesy of one of the favorite websites that you love to love, or heck, even some love to hate. But I don't know how you can hate it because it's freaking awesome. Podmatch.com, the wonderful site where podcast guests get to connect with podcast hosts. And today we got one heck of a guest that's cooler than that. We'll give him 5 out of 2 on the cool meter when it comes to being cooler than 5 cucumbers, because today's guest in particular, my man used to be a former inner city school teacher that is on a mission to bring back joy to education and in the workplace by transforming struggling and reluctant readers into more passionate and proficient readers. So let's give it up for a fellow DB. It's going to be DB squared today, baby. The one and only Dr. Danny Brassell. How you doing today, Dr. Danny?
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Dom. And more importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need it now more than ever, my friend.
Oh, yeah, you can say that again, man. Shoot, it's... I don't get it, man.
Yep. Yeah, that's my first tip of the day. I was watching this horrible show on TV the other night called The News, and
Yeah.
I just turned it off. I'm like, you got to fill your mind with positive things. So that's why I listen to your podcast and surround myself with people that lift me up.
Amen to that, man. So my goodness, like, and the beautiful thing is I love everything that you're doing because you're like encouraging folks to become better readers, and you come at it from a different perspective as opposed to the good old read a book, you'll be fine, especially if it's 800, 900 pages. You'll expand your cranium to like the size of Texas. Like, it's not that, it's like this new way of thinking that's so simple. So my goodness, as with all introductions, like, I'm pretty sure I forgot some things. So what led you up to where you became today, the wonderful Dr. DB that's in front of us today?
Well, thank you for that, fellow DB, Dom. It's ironic I'm considered America's leading reading ambassador because I grew up hating reading. My father was a librarian, and I always hated the public library growing up. It always smelled funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always some freaky homeless guy. I thought he was a vampire hanging out in the library. It wasn't until I started teaching in South Central Los Angeles in Compton where I saw a lot of my students didn't have a lot of the advantages I had growing up. I mean, I was very blessed, Dom. I mean, both of my parents were in the home. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us, to us kids, and we always had plenty of access to reading materials. And it got me angry. I said, you know what, we need to do something about this. And what I've identified is that American schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they think it's fun. And so there's simple strategies that I share with teachers and parents to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading.
That's what I'm talking about, indeed. And funny enough, I can resonate. with some of the hating reading parts. Kind of fun how your dad's a librarian and I work at a library, and I actually listened to one of your past interviews, and apparently a book that we share common distaste for is the Scarlet Letter because I had to force to read that in high school too.
Well, no offense to the people that love the Scarlet Letter, but in
Right.
high school, I had a teacher that forced us to read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And for those who don't know, the story is about Hester Prynne commits adultery, and so she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And in class, I raised my hand and I asked my teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. And this is one of the points I make to people. The research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. Here's a little tip for all the parents listening right now. The little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who refuses to read anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but we got to get the kid hooked on it first. I'll give an example. When I was teaching second grade, I had a little boy, Kiara, and Kiara's first grade teacher told me, Kiara don't know nothing. I'm like, well, thank you for that. Well, Kiara, who don't know nothing, comes in my class one day. He's like, hey, Mr. Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points, 16 boards. I'm like, thank you, Kiara. Because from that day forward, Dom, every day after lunch, I'd sit Kiara on my lap and we'd read the LA Times sports page together. And wouldn't you know it, by the end of the year, Kiara was one of the best readers in my class. And all that kid ever read about was sports. Now, again, I'm not saying literature is not important, but it's not the end all be all. What's important is giving those kids a taste for reading so that they want to do it again and again.
Boom. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. Because you're so right. And that's a powerful story right there because it's so true. Like that gateway drug, like folks may think of it with the whole weed and everything, god awful else, but like, hey, it can work for reading as well. And heck, even reminds me of a popular entrepreneur, Gary V, who doesn't like to read books, but he reads so many comments because he likes to try to stay close to the pulse of his client base, and that just further proves that powerful tip of, hey, like getting him to enjoy reading and focusing on them on why they want to read, so that way they'll actually want to read more and read what's important to them, and then heck, read even stuff that may seem unimportant at one time, but may pay off later.
I like that example, Dom, because Gary Vee's is showing you we need to expand our definition of literacy. Reading
Mhm.
doesn't just mean Jane Austen. Reading can
Mhm.
be the newspaper, it can be reading your comments on social media, and it's got to be something that you're interested in. I was doing a podcast for a Nigerian station, and the host was asking me, why don't kids read in Nigeria? And I said, well, Nigeria has only been an independent country for about, 60 years, but it's still based on a British schooling system. And so the kids in Nigeria are forced to read Charles Dickens and Jane Austen and William Shakespeare. And there's nothing wrong with those people. But I think that those kids would be much more interested in reading like a Nigerian author like Chinua Achebe, something like that. I mean, when I was teaching in South Central, I was very blessed when I taught middle schoolers. I had eighth grade special education, which wasn't special education. It was 16 boys that nobody else wanted to teach, eight African American, eight Latino. And if their life wasn't miserable enough, they got stuck with the white dude as the teacher. And I was supposed to teach those guys like Shakespeare, Macbeth. And the way I was able to get them interested in Macbeth is we were blessed because in Los Angeles, we have a great author, Walter Mosley, who's from that part of town. And he writes in language that the kids understand. And so we read Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned. And then it was great because once we read that, then I could say, well, here's what Shakespeare's doing with Macbeth. All these guys are talking, you don't understand them. They're just talking their own street slang back in Elizabethan England. And the guy's like, oh, so I'm like, yeah, these are like gangs. I mean, this is exactly what's going on. So the kids had a reference point. They understood what was going on. And that's what I always tell people. That's why you read is you try to get in other people's shoes, to try and figure out, well, what's it like? You don't ever have to leave Los Angeles to have a passport to the world. Your passport is a public library card. And I just think we're failing a lot of kids by defining literature as Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm like, but you know, when was the last time, Dom, at work, your boss came in and said, "Hey, Brightman, I need you to read this novel by tomorrow"? They never say that. You have to learn how to read like technical reports and things like that. I mean, let's expand the definition of literacy. And I'm not putting down any type of reading. I'm really not. Different strokes for different folks. But I'm saying, don't tell me that this is the only way. It's the same problem with the American education system. I was being interviewed the other day, and the anchor woman, she said, "Well, Danny, what do you think? Public schools or private schools?" And my answer was yes. She's like, "What do you
Yeah.
mean?" I'm like, well, some kids, public school is the option. Some kids, it's vocational school. Some kids, it's homeschool. Some kids, it's charter school. There's different strokes for different folks. Everybody's a little bit different. I mean, Dom, you and I both like to read about successful people. And there's one thing that always drives me nuts when I'm reading a biography of a successful person. Most of them dropped out of school. So that tells me what school doing, right? I mean, what's going on? Look at Gary Vee. Gary Vee wasn't a great student, but he's a great entrepreneur. He's a fun speaker. I mean, he drops F-bombs every other word. I mean, maybe not my choice of vocabulary, but he is really effective in the points that he's making. And he says he doesn't read, but I know he reads because he's written some really good books. And there's plenty of readers that don't become writers, but I've never read a writer that wasn't an avid reader. So he's not letting on that. I mean, maybe he's reading something else, but I guarantee you he's reading.
Heck yeah, indeed. Heck yeah, indeed. And it's such a powerful mindset shift too. And I love the story. Like that's a powerful example when you had was basically teaching those quote unquote special education kids, the kids that none of the other teachers just wanted to deal with, is that you actually took a situation and you actually went outside the darn rubric and really was able to communicate to them effectively that way. So what led to that train of thought to be able to get the kids to actually be able to really read Macbeth and help them to realize, hey, that was just the way they talked back then. That was their version of street slang because folks would just give them the book, but they wouldn't prepare them for it.
That's a cool question, Dom. I mean, I get very annoyed that I always tell people kids rise or fall based on your expectation. One of my favorite quotes came from Michelangelo. He said that the greater danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it.
Mm.
Students achieve exactly what you think you're going to achieve. I always look, my first day teaching special education, I looked at those 16 boys, and the principal had told me, hey, try and keep them out of the juvie center as long as you can. I'm like, what are you thinking? That's a ridiculous expectation. So I changed it with the guys. I looked at them, I said, hey, you guys have to help me out. This is my first time teaching the gifted and talented program. The guys are like, what? And I'm like, hey, I believe in all of you. Sometimes you need somebody else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. I believe in all of you. They only give me the best and the brightest. It's all about how to get people in a different frame of mind. I mean, watch. I always give the example. You and I were talking football beforehand. I love football. And I look at the San Francisco 49ers. The year before Jim Harbaugh became their coach, they were 3-13. And the
Mm.
very next year, he becomes the coach with the exact same team, and they go 13-3 and go to the NFC Championship. Well,
Yeah.
he was doing something different. He got those guys in a believer's mindset. And I'm watching the NCAA tournament right now, and I can always tell who the good coach is. Everybody else is watching the players. I'm watching the coaches because the coach that's screaming all the time, I'm like, he's going to lose. It's the coach. It's the coach just sitting back, and when he's in the huddle with everybody, he's like, "Okay, guys, here's what you're." I mean, I was watching the. I was disappointed they lost because the interim coach for Texas, I really thought he was doing a heck of a job coaching those guys. He was put in a horrible situation, and how did he treat his team? He treated them like family. I love all of you. He had great relationships with his players. I could see it. I was just watching it. If you look at Miami, Jim Larinaga, watching with his players, and they're all like, it's a family. It's all about relationships. Once your kids realize, I mean, it's not just relationships with students, by the way. I make those relationships with parents. I mean, I'm constantly talking to the parents, telling them about all the great things their kids are doing, because most parents only hear the bad stuff. I want them to hear lots of positives. And I want that parent to understand you and I have the same goal for your kid to move mountains. Like, The reason I became a teacher was when I realized Oprah had a teacher, the president of the United
Mm,
States had a teacher, this really good parent, they had a teacher. I'm like, I could be that person that can inspire that kid. I mean, my most basic goal when I became a teacher was, hey, I want the guys to have at least one white person in their life that they don't despise, that they're like, okay, there was at least one, because it was crazy just having really just talks with the guys. I'm like, wow, you've only been exposed to this. I mean, that's really the problem in America is when people are not getting along, it's like they're just not exposed to one another. The more I talk to people, I'm like, wow, we're really not all that different. I mean, we have our differences, I tell people, and there's nothing wrong with that. We should have differences. You and I shouldn't like everything. And matter of fact, if we were all the same, the pandemic would have wiped us all out. But we're different.
mhm.
That's what makes America the greatest country on the planet, is because we are just a salad bowl with lots of flavor. And I love that. It's something we should be embracing, not freaking out. And unfortunately, the easy way in education is to treat every kid like they're a widget, the same. And I'm like, they're all different. And kids are like automobiles, they all require their own type of gasoline. And some students are a little bit higher octane than other students. And I just have to figure out how to, every kid's a little bit different. You got 36 kids in your classroom, that's 36 different learning styles. When I played basketball in high school, I had a coach, and at the awards assembly, he was giving me an award for most improved player. And he said, some players you can yell at, some players you got to talk to. Danny, you got to talk to. And I'm like, yeah, you yell at me, I'm going to go crazy. But it's the same thing. Everybody's a little bit different. And it's kind of like what I tell teachers. I'm like, teaching style is very overrated. I mean, I'm energetic, and I like to play a lot, but I wouldn't say that's the only teaching style. I mean, some of my best teachers were like military, 4 foot 138-year-old ladies that I was like, wow, I learned a lot from that person. It's totally different teaching style. I mean, my mentor, I was the only, when I taught in my first elementary school in Compton, I was the only man at my school. I was the only white person at my school. Most of my colleagues were elderly African American women from the South who all had been teaching for at least 20 years. And my mentor was Mrs. Turner, who had been teaching for 40 years. She was from
Oh, wow.
Alabama. She believed in two things: discipline and the Bible. I mean, whenever her little ones got out of line, she started reading aloud Revelations to them. And it was that beautiful saint of a human being who took me under her wing, and she taught me how to be a good teacher. We were very different teachers, but I would put my kid in her classroom. She had a heart of gold, and she was all about, stop underestimating these kids. That's we underestimate. I don't give people that pass. No way. Like, oh, they're poor, so you can have a lower expectation. I take exactly the opposite view. I mean, when I first started teaching, I used to watch the movie Lean on Me like every day with Morgan Freeman. One of my favorite, most inspirational movies. He's in New Jersey principal, and the climatic scene is he gets in front of all the students. He's like, I have your test scores back. You have passed the minimum skills exam. And I always love that scene. Well, I'm watching it with a buddy one day, and he's like, wow, they have minimum skills. They're still not competitive. Oh my gosh, Dom,
Yeah.
that ruined my life. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's right. And I told my students, I'm like, we got to do better. We have to do a lot better because people already underestimate us. We have a whole bunch of strikes against us. We got to
Yep.
really turn it on. It was great. It gave me a totally different mind. See, again, that's why I love talking to different people. Wow, both of us watched the same movie. He got a totally different lesson than I did. But I'm like, once I heard his lesson, I'm like, you are right. That's exactly right. I need to push my kids further. And so that's what I miss that. I miss that with the kids. Now it's great because I get to help burnt out teachers and administrators. They're about to quit. And I say, hey, man, my job is to keep, if you're good, my job is to keep you. If you're bad, we don't want you. But if you're good, I want you for 30 years.
Uh, good deal indeed. Good deal indeed. I'm telling you, this man's like a walking book of Proverbs right here. That's right
I know I'm
indeed.
like long answers to short questions. I'm sorry. King Solomon at your disposal.
Sweet. There we go. You love to see it. And my goodness, man, and that's actually a good actually, well, yeah, it's a good place to be and an interesting place to be now, helping out burnt out teachers. So what's probably been the major things that you've been noticing in teachers nowadays now that they had to battle a pandemic teaching via Zoom, where probably half or most of the techniques probably were thrown back in the bag of tricks, never to be used for a couple years, and
Yeah.
now having to deal with kids with these emotional issues of being isolated and not being around other kids.
Yeah, that's a really important question, Dom. I don't think we even have any idea what's happening in this country. I mean, think about it. Think about those 2 years where kids were all excited to start kindergarten and they had to do it online. Think about all
Mm,
those high school juniors and seniors that were excited about playing sports and going to prom, and they didn't get to experience those things. Think about all those teachers that are trying to work on Zoom to work with these. And thank God for Zoom. I mean, people gripe about Zoom. Like, can you imagine the pandemic if we didn't have Zoom? I mean, that would have been really catastrophic. But again, it was catastrophic in a place like where I used to teach because most of the kids didn't have computers. And so they had to create pop
mhm.
up centers in all the malls so that the kids had a place to go still. I pointed out to my wife when the pandemic began, I'm like, oh, this is going to be an interesting lesson for America. And my wife's like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh, it's going to become public knowledge that about 15 million kids in this country, the reason they go to school is so they can eat.
Mhm.
She didn't even know that. I'm like, no, no, this is the truth. I mean, there's a survey that's done every 10 years for American educators on their biggest concerns. And so in 1950, the biggest concern for teachers was students not raising their hands. In 2020, it was teachers being shot in a school shooting. I mean, that's what's happened in the last 70 years. I was making this point yesterday at a conference. I said, we lost fewer troops abroad in hostilities in 2020 and 2021 than we lost elementary school students in our schools and mass shootings in 2022. That's a disgusting statistic. And this is where I have no interest in politics in this country because politicians love to talk, but they don't like to walk. I'm interested in solutions. What do we
Mhm.
do? I mean, that's the most basic thing. You should feel safe in school. The kids should feel safe. The teacher should feel safe. I mean, and this isn't to knock the military, but military's trained for combat situations. Isn't it disgusting that we have kindergarten teachers that they're saying, oh, you should arm that person? Like, oh, that's the solution. Are you crazy? I mean, let's have a rational conversation in this country where we talk about, well, what I mean, this is why I got fired all the time, Dom. I mean, I have a big mouth, I always would say if the answer to my question is not because that's what's good for this kid, why are we doing it? Every kid is different. Let's figure out how do we make this better. And school shooting, it cracks me up. People are like, "Oh, were you scared in the hood?" I'm like, you don't hear about mass school shootings in the hood. They're always in these like private schools and nice affluent communities. I mean, Sandy Hook, one of the most affluent communities in the country, is shot with 30 preschoolers and kindergarten. I mean, it's just disgusting. I mean, come on, folks. Let's come on. I mean, what has to happen? Does somebody have to actually have their own kid shot before they decide to do something about it? I mean, it's just disgusting to me. And so like, but that's for somebody else to solve. My goal is always, hey, we need to, what I try to tell educators is you need to take your job seriously without taking yourself seriously because you ain't all that and neither am I. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergarten for 1 week. Those little ones will set you straight. I mean, I was teaching kindergarten one day. One of my little
Nope.
girls, LaShonda, raises her hand. I'm like, LaShonda, question. She's like, Miss Brassell, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, LaShonda. I ain't all that. And so, I think everybody, not just teachers, everybody in society, they need to laugh more. The way you're going to laugh more is turn off the news, get off the social media, and start surrounding yourself with positive influences.
Amen to that. And my man, Dr. Dan, is a positive influence himself indeed. And the good news is you're spreading it through your writings indeed. So, if I'm not mistaken, 14 books you have, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm up to 16 and I'm writing number 17 right now. The last book I wrote, so when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher in my school not to have any tardy students. And the reason
Oh,
was because
wow.
I always started off class with a Paul Harvey story. You're younger than me. I grew up listening to Paul Harvey on the radio. He'd come on every day at 12:15. He'd be like, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And for the 5 minutes, you're trying to figure out, well, who's he talking about, or what's the company he's talking about? And my students loved those, but Dom, a lot of the stories he would share are about like Sears and Roebuck. Well, kids today, they don't even know what Sears Roebuck is. And
Yeah.
so the last book I wrote is called Leadership Begins with Motivation. And it's basically an homage to Paul Harvey, but these stories are about people and companies and places that the kids would know about today. So here, I'll just share one with you right now. On the morning of January 17th, 1977, Gary Gilmore, in a plain t shirt, strapped into a chair with a bag over his head, awaited a firing squad of 5 law enforcement officers to execute him at the state prison in Draper, Utah. Convicted of murdering a gas station employee and motel manager in Utah the year before, Gilmore would be the first person in the United States to be executed in nearly a decade. Shortly before his execution, prison officials asked Gilmore if he had any last words. Neither he nor anyone else that day would know the impact of those words. Over 10 years later, in 1988, Dan Whedon, an advertising executive who co founded the Whedon and Kennedy Agency in Portland, Oregon, made something of a morbid pitch to a struggling fashion company. He recalled the inmate's final words and used a slight variation for his pitch, and seemingly everyone hated his idea for the company's new slogan. Just trust me on this one, Whedon implored the company's co founder. And the co founder, his company, and the public have not looked back since. The co founder's name was Phil Knight. The struggling brand he co founded was a shoe company called Nike. An advertising executive, Dan Whedon, slightly altered death row inmate Gary Gilmore's final words, let's do it, into the phrase, just do it. That's how I get my kids interested in different people and places and stuff. And it was interesting, Dom, after I wrote this book, I read it and I'm like, completely unintentionally, I have so many examples in this book that are of white male Americans. And that was totally unintentionally. I have no idea why that happened. And so the book I'm writing right now is the same type of book, but it focuses primarily on females, minorities, and international examples, because kids need to hear about successful people from like lots of different arrays. And so that's my passion project right now. I'm getting to learn all kinds of really cool things right now.
Sweet. That's what I'm talking about indeed. And a powerful story right there. And just that example alone of stories like that, because you just hear the descriptions, you hear no names, and it's like, oh, well, the Gary Gilmore name and Phil Knight at the end, but still, it's like, oh, you're like with bated breath, like, where is he taking this? And it's like, oh, so that's what's going on. It's like, oh, then wait, Nike, like those Air Jordans? Oh, shoot, yeah, that guy, yeah. It's like getting them excited and keeping them, I guess, in a way, edutained.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of competition nowadays, Tom. I mean, average American has limited attention. What was I talking about? Yeah, most Americans most Americans can sit and listen for about 17 minutes, give or take 17 minutes, and kids are just as bad as anybody. So I got to keep. And that was actually, I did it the wrong way, Dom. I've taught all age levels. I started off high school, and then they moved me from high school to middle school to upper elementary to lower elementary to pretty
Oh,
soon instead
wow.
of preparing students for college, I was coming home with snot marks all over my pants from my little ones hugging me. And I did it the wrong way because I learned what works with a 12th grader does not necessarily work with a kindergartner, but what works with a kindergartner works with all age levels, you know. But I always call kindergarten New York, New York, because if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, because those kids have about a 7 minute attention span and you got to keep things moving or they'll just go all over you. And it was good. It made me a much better teacher. You know, I always like the challenge. I like it. I always love it when they give me a kid that they, oh, this kid, this is like the bad kid. I'm like, really, really, we'll see.
That's right. He's always up for a challenge indeed. Definitely always up for a challenge. So my goodness, like with all this wonderful knowledge, like do you journal every day? Because it's not every day you get to pen 17 books. So go ahead and say 17, because we already know 17 is going to be out
And
like the rest of them.
perfect. I like that. You know, I used to journal. I'm trying to do one of the books I have that I've been reading is this great book. It's a 40-day prayer challenge by Pastor Mark Batterson. He's actually in DC. And one of the things he says is you should do a prayer journal and see that way you can reflect and see all the great things God's doing in your life. So I'm like, oh, I need to do that. I still haven't even taken it. This is my third time through the book, and I'm like, I think I should start actually taking the advice and taking action on one of these things. Really, what I do more than anything, though, Dom, some people collect stamps, some people collect football cards. I collect stories. I'm always
Mm.
reading anything looking for the cool story. I mean, I was just reading a book the other day and the book stunk. I didn't like the book at all, but there was one story in the book which made it worth reading the entire book. And it was this marketing book. PR guy, it's marketing guy, and he was going all around the world trying to figure out the next big his fortune. And he was in Chile and watching these fishermen, and he noticed the fishermen, they were catching all these fish, and fish that they weren't supposed to catch, and those were the fish that the fishermen would eat. And that fish actually tasted better than the fish that they were. And so he's like, oh, this might be the next big thing. And so he asked the fisherman, he's like, well, what do you call this fish? And they're like, oh, it's the toothfish. He's like, the toothfish? That sounds horrible. And so he introduced the toothfish into the United States, but he changed the name to the Chilean sea bass, and it's the best-selling fish in America. I'm like, that's a fantastic story. Give me any kind of interesting story. I mean, in sports, I read sports stories all the time, or I'll watch documentaries or anything. I was watching a thing, the Ken Burns ball, and now I need to read some stories in the Negro Leagues. Greatest pitcher was Satchel Paige. Hitter was Josh Gibson. They say, I mean, Satchel Paige, when he actually made it to the major leagues, when they finally allowed him in, I think he was like 46 years old. And it was basically the Negro League World Series, basically like game 7, bottom of the ninth. This is to decide everything. And the bases are empty, and there's 2 outs, and Satchel Paige is pitching, and Josh Gibson, he would be the third batter. And Page, he's just a talker, and he looks at Gibson. He's like, I'm going to walk these other 2 batters so we can settle who's the best once and for all. So he intentionally walks the first 2 batters. So there's 2 outs. It's him against Josh Gibson. And he looks at Gibson. I mean, the guy's just talking like crazy. He's trash talking. He's like worse than Jordan. Jordan always trash talked on the court. It always cracks me up. And so he's looking at Josh Gibson. He's like, man, you can't hit me. Hey, fastball right down the middle. He tells him the pitch he's going to pitch. So he throws a fastball, swing, strike 1. Gibson misses it. And Page is laughing. He's like, you stink, man. You ain't anything. You don't even belong on the same field with me, man. Hey, same pitch, fastball down the middle. Throws a fastball down the middle. Josh Gibson swings, strike 2. Page is like, oh man, these folks, man, they in for a treat. They got to see the best today. It's Satchel Paige. I want you to know, exact same pitch, strike. It's going to be a strike. It's going to be a fastball right down the middle. Throws his third pitch, strike 3. And Page just walks off laughing. And I'm like, oh my gosh. To see that kind of greatness. I mean, he's cocky, maybe we need to read our Bible for some humility, but I just wish I could have watched that. I mean, like I feel so blessed whenever, I mean, my wife always wonders why I'm so into sports. I'm like, because you can see greatness any day. I mean, I grew up and I got to watch Jordan, and that was actually one of the blessings of the pandemic, is they had that 10-part documentary, The Last Dance, about the Bulls. Dom, I forget how much I loved watching Jordan, just his layups. I'm like, this guy's in the air for like 10 seconds. He's like having a snack while he's in the. I've never seen anything like it. And it's actually one of my criteria when we talk about the greatest players of all time is, and I'm a huge Lakers fan, and people are like, oh, LeBron's the greatest of all time. I'm like, well, statistically, he's going to be the greatest in everything. Absolutely. And I think LeBron's like the classiest guy, have nothing but praise for him. But one of my criteria for the greatest is, would you buy a ticket to watch him? Because
Mm.
Jordan, any given night, did 3 things that made my jaw drop. I'm like, how does he do that? Same thing like in football. Everybody's like, oh, Tom Brady's the greatest of all time. I'm like, well, I mean, statistically, yeah. I mean, he's a winner. He's great. He's a great guy. That's fine. I'm not going to argue that. But I wouldn't buy a ticket to watch Tom Brady. I'd watch it. I'd buy a ticket to watch John Elway come back. Like that guy would always come back. They'd be down with 2 minutes left, and he'd come back. Or watch Patrick Mahomes now. I mean, Patrick Mahomes basically like Michelangelo. He's doing things on the football field. I'm like, holy cow, how did he do that? I've never seen a person toss the ball that way. Or, I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
scrambled. He's amazing. He's an artist out there. And so that's what I love. I love watching people that aren't just great. I mean, I lived in Spain for a little while. And so I studied some art while I was there. And everybody wanted me to study Picasso. And I'm like, Picasso's weird. I don't even understand any of his paintings. Well, then they took me to a museum where it was Picasso's art when he was a teenager. And Picasso could go into a room, look at the room, leave the room, and then paint basically a photograph of that room. And when I saw that he could do that, I'm like, oh, this guy mastered the fundamentals. And all these other paintings, he's so far beyond me. I have to catch up and learn what he was seeing that other people weren't seeing. And it's the same thing, when I listen to like an interview with Michael Jordan, the game slowed down for him. Like it's going fast for everybody else, and he's like he sees things nobody else sees. And I just love getting into that mindset. I love the mindset. I'm like, why is it Scottie Pippen doesn't want to take the last shot and Michael is begging for the ball? Kobe was the same way. Kobe, he missed so many last second shots, and people don't remember those. They remember the ones he made because he always give me the ball, give me the ball, give me. I mean, I was just watching that documentary, The Redeem Team, and it was wonderful because the guys are all sitting there. They're in Vegas, all these NBA players, and they've been out at clubbing all night, and they're getting back at 4 a.m. They get on the elevator, and there's Kobe drenched in sweat. He's already been in the gym working out at 4 a.m, and he's going to do some more workout. And all of a sudden, all these other NBA guys are like, damn. And by the end of the week, they were all in the gym because they're all young guys. And they're like, man, if Kobe Bryant's working out, maybe I need to work out. And it's like, wow, I love those stories. This is where I love Gary Vee. Gary Vee says, he always tells it as it is. He's like, oh, people tell you to work smarter, not harder. He's like, well, he's like, just so you know, Mark Zuckerberg works 20 hours a day. Elon Musk works 20 hours a day. You got to work smart and hard. Nobody gets anywhere without working hard. That's what I always told my guys. When I was teaching every single one of my boys, and I taught boys and girls, much prefer the girls. The girls are brilliant. I mean, I have no idea how we even evolved. But my boys always wanted to be in the NBA. And I always said to them, like, that's a great goal. I want you to pursue that goal. And I want you to understand this. There are 125 job openings every single year in the NBA.
Hmm.
Like, did you know that every year there are 25,000 openings for medical doctors in this country? And over the course of their lifetime, doctors make more than the average NBA player. And I'm like, I'm not telling you don't go for the MBA. I want you to go for the MBA, but I don't want you to do it at the expense of your education, because you always have a backup, because you never hear about all these guys that get injured trying to pursue their dream, and they're done. Or I mean, I watched that documentary Broke about all these professional athletes, and within 3 years of retiring, they're all filing bankruptcy. I'm like, what's going on there? I mean, we need to have financial education for these guys. So I mean, I don't know. I'm going off on a tangent, but well, this is what you knew you'd get this, DP, is short questions, long responses.
Hey, it's so good. It's all good. Might even have to do a part two. So my goodness, so if you have been on these interviews, so many promoting the good work that you're doing, is there a question that you wish folks would ask you more often?
Goodness, I don't know. I guess that it's the question I haven't been asked. Maybe one of the things is the other things that I'm doing. So I'm mission oriented. So my mission is to bring the joy back in education and the workplace. And so I do that in 4 different arenas. First of all, what we've been discussing is I speak all over the world to teachers and to principals, trying to get them not to quit. Secondly, I have the top online reading engagement program in the world, which basically trains parents in just a couple of months to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading. Third, I work with a company out of Ireland called Cyber Smarties, which is actually a social media platform for kids ages 5 to 12. And it teaches kids how to use social media in a responsible way. So let's say you
Wow.
type a message to me, Dom, you're like, Danny, I think you're ugly. It won't let you send the message. Instead, it stops you and says, that's not a nice thing to say. Here are more positive ways to phrase that. And it annoys kids that it slows them down so much that within 2 weeks, they refuse to write anything negative. They're only writing positive messages. This system has completely eliminated cyberbullying in Ireland. And so now we have the program in India, it's in the
Oh,
UAE, it's
wow.
in Turkey, it's in New Zealand, and they're trying to. I'm now employed now to get it into the United States, which we need it now more than ever. Actually, Utah just passed a law saying that kids can't go on social media without parent approval. I think social media just kind of happened and nobody ever taught people how to use social media. And of course, what happens is you always get the lowest common denominator and all the negativity is thrown in. But if you teach people the right way to do it, it can actually be a very positive tool. So that's the third thing I'm doing. And then finally, I work with entrepreneurs and business owners crafting. I help them craft what I call a stump speech, which is basically what makes you uniquely you. It's your talk that you can deliver to 1,000 people in a ballroom or 10 people in a boardroom. I show people how to create powerful presentations that engage their audience to take the next step with them, whether it's to buy your product or to donate to your cause or to just buy into your idea that you're trying to pitch. So those are the four things that I'm doing all the time, and I, I I I love it. I'm enthusiastic about all four.
Amen to that. And my goodness. And
You're my
cyber
Baptist man in
smarties.
the front row. I love it. Amen. Amen. I love it.
Well, yeah, dude, because it's like, man, it's a lot of great things you're doing, especially that cyber smarties, because you're so right. Social media just kind of happened. Adults got their hands on it. Then, as the adults got older and the kids grew up and found stuff, because they're always going to find stuff, and it's like, oh, wow, well, this is a thing, and it just turned into the
Crazy.
wild, wild west.
Did you see when I can't remember what it was called? Microsoft created like an avatar that was going to learn about Twitter, and her
Mm.
name was like Wendy or something. And so it's AI, and her first post is, "My name is Wendy. I am here to learn all about Twitter. Have a fantastic day." And so it was taking all the information from Twitter, and they had to pull down the site within 24 hours because within 24 hours she's like, I think Hitler was a great man and Trump should be reelected. I'm like, oh my God. And people are like, oh, it's just going crazy. And so they had
Uh.
to pull it down. They're just trying to learn. I'm like, wow, that just shows you. I mean, if an alien comes down from outer space and learns about us, are they going to learn all the negatives that quickly?
That's kind of like the running joke. It's like, man, we see how they treat people on Earth. That's we can't go there.
That's right. Let's go somewhere else on this alien vacation.
Oh man. So since you're a fellow believer, always invite fellow Christians to share their salvation testimony on the podcast. So that way, hey, you never know. Some listeners may be curious. So how'd you become a Christian, my man?
I love that you do that, Dom. I absolutely, I've always encouraged my pastors to allow people to give their testimonials at church because to me the boring ones are the most fascinating ones. I mean, Saul. I mean, heck, if God's talking to you directly, I mean that's a Damascus moment's one thing, but like I once heard a guy give his testimonial, and he'd just been running his restaurant for about 18 years down the street from our church, and he's like, well, everybody was so nice, and I decided maybe I should learn more about that. I was like, wow, that was like the most fascinating testimonial ever. Well, I always tell people in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam. And we lost everything. We lost everything. And I could focus on all the
Ouch.
negatives, but I'm a positive person. I like to focus on the positives. And so, first of all, my wife is my life mate. I put her through hell and she stuck right by me. Amazing human being. Second of all, I'm no longer tight with money because I realize easy come, easy go. It's just a tool, just like anything else. Third, I learned not to judge other people. I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who looked at what I did, I'd be like, you deserve that. But I realize now, if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a public speaker because I didn't want to file for bankruptcy. And my accountant's like, well, you're going to have to make this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Dom, he gave me a much higher number and I hit that number right on the number. And so in year three, I thought to myself, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I built up a very successful speaking business, which has me going all over the place. And then fifth, I became a Christian because of it. And I always feel embarrassed to say it, but the more I read the Bible, I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. But this is the interesting thing about this testimony, because I got married in 2002, Dom, and my wife, she had never told me this. She had reservations about marrying me because I was tight with money and I wasn't a Christian. And isn't it
Mm.
interesting that God arranged for all this to happen? And now I'm a Christian. I'm no longer tight with money, and uh, it's been just so many blessings in my life. And one of the biggest blessings for me was when the pandemic occurred. We couldn't go to church, and it was great because I found this online men's Bible study that I still attend every Monday morning at 7:15 a.m. There's about 15 of us from all over the country, all age levels, and we're just finishing up right now First and Second Timothy and Titus. But it's just neat to be surrounded by a bunch of other men who have their own problems that I can pray for, and I know that they're praying for me. And I just love how we can all read the exact same text in the Bible and get different interpretations from it. I love learning from people that way. But it's been a real blessing to me. And you know, I'll have people come up to me after a speech and they'll say, you're a Christian, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I could tell you put some things in there that were great. You're doing a great job. I'm like, no, I'm not. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'll be doing a great job when non-believers are coming up to me after the talk. I mean, my pastor, Dom, every single weekend, he gets at least two people converted to Christianity. I'm like, oh man, it's going to be so easy for him in heaven. St. Peter's like, come on in. I'm like, man, I need to get my butt off the seat and help people out. I mean, one of the churches I used to attend, they had a great tagline. They said, "Love God, love others, make disciples." And so, hopefully, in my actions, I'm getting people interested in loving God, definitely being kinder to one another, and making disciples. For 2023, my goal is to turn Christianity from a noun to a verb and get people being a little bit nicer to one another. Again, we can disagree. We can disagree. I have no problem with that, but we don't have to be disagreeable towards one another. But that's the question nobody's ever asked me that I love, Dom. I mean, a lot of people freak out about that, but I'm very grateful to you for that. Thank you for that question.
Oh, my pleasure indeed. Because that's the thing, and that's a powerful mission too, to make Christianity a verb and having it not be a noun all the time. Because hey, a lot of Christians, like most of them, depending on where you go, they really don't evangelize, and it's like it's not a requirement. It's like because usually the life you live is how folks are going to be drawn to you. But it's like, hey, folks really get a chance to talk about it. Nowadays, folks really kind of don't want to say anything because they don't want to get stoned.
Yeah, well, sure, that's exactly right. Well, I was blessed when I was teaching in Compton. Mrs. Turner, my mentor, she asked me one day, she's like, Mr. Brassell, there's a Hispanic family coming to my AME, and I don't believe they understand the preacher. Can you come translate? So imagine this, Tom. It's a Sunday. I grew up Catholic. I'm used to like rules and stuff. I've never been to an AME. The preacher's like James Brown. This guy's the most exciting guy I've ever seen. Service is like 4 hours long. There's
Yep.
400 African Americans, this small little Hispanic family, and this white dude in the back. Basically trying to translate for this guy, being like "Dios es bueno," and it was so great. I mean, I loved it. That's where I was actually having this conversation with a guy yesterday. We were talking about how different denominations they critique one another. I'm like, they're missing the point.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
everybody's a little bit different. I mean, I'm Christian, but one of the most positive experiences in my life, Dom, was I'm a visiting distinguished professor at the American University in Cairo, in Egypt. Say that 5 times fast. So whenever I go back to Egypt. I like to speak to the different schools in the area. And so I spoke at this Islamic school and I was doing a parent training. And Dom, I had a lot of reservations about this. It was freaking me out. Well, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 400 parents showed up to my training. It was unbelievable to me. All the guys had the long beards, all the women were in burqas. And we were talking like you and I are talking right now. And I thought, man, shame on me. I had all these misconceptions about Islam. And I started off my talk. I said, so I was reading this book. Have any of you ever read the Quran? And they all start laughing. And I'm like, oh, well, then you know the story when the angel Gabriel appears to Muhammad in the cave. What's his first instruction to Muhammad? Because the first pillar of Islam is to read. And so I looked at all those parents. I'm like, so what you're saying is not only should we get your kids reading, it's actually written in your most sacred text. It's your duty to get your kids reading. And I had 400 parents nodding, and I'm like, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Who would have thought the Christian dude, his favorite audiences are Islamic audience? I mean, I love speaking. I speak all around the world now to all these Muslim audiences, and it's like, wow, this is where I always tell people you need to break bread together. There's so many
Mm,
people that have these misconceptions, and I'm like, if you ever look at it, that's the problem. Is people just aren't forced to be together. When you're forced to be together, you start to realize, oh, this is another human being. And again, you don't have to agree on everything. Most people don't. I mean, my wife and I don't agree on everything, but you can be kind to one another. And so that's probably, I love. It was either John Wooden or Harry Truman who said, "It's the things we learn after we know it all that matter the most in life." And the older I get, the more I realize I really don't know that much, and I love learning.
amen to that, because it keeps getting better and better, y'all. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. Well, two more questions and let my man make a run for it. So the first one's a fun one. So if your wonderful book, Leadership Begins with Motivation, if that book were a food, what would it be and why?
The food, it would be broccoli because it's nourishing, nourishes your soul.
Oh, there you go. That's right indeed. Funny enough, second one to say broccoli about their book.
Broccoli is like a wonder. It's one of those essential brain foods. Broccoli, blueberries, all these things. They have all the nutrients you possibly need.
Heck yeah, indeed. Heck yeah, indeed. So, my goodness, and of course, the magical question every guest gets to receive. If you were to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but you're still in the current year, what advice would you give to yourself?
Enjoy the ride. It's going to be fun. It's tough. I hear speakers say that all the time. I always say, you ever notice that the people that say enjoy the journey have already succeeded? I mean, when you're going through the journey, were you having fun? Oh man, I can't make rent. Man, that's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm really enjoying this journey. That's the worst advice ever. But that's what I always tell people. I'm like, God's just laughing at us because God knows the ending. We don't know the ending. We're sitting here struggling and we're freaking out about stuff. It's just total nonsense. It's useless. I mean, um, life's too short. People need to laugh, man. I mean, enjoy one another. I mean, every day. Actually, I was doing this. One of my coaching clients the other day. She was griping. I was sick of listening to her gripe. And I said, I'm like, if I gave you $1 million, what would you do? And she's like, oh,
Mm,
I'd say thank you. I'm like, okay, great. I'm like, okay, if I gave you $10 million, what would you do? And she's like, oh my gosh, that would solve all my problems. I'm like, okay, how about this? If I gave you $10 million, but said you can't wake up tomorrow morning, what would you do? And she's like, I wouldn't
mm,
take it. I'm like,
mm,
so what you just told me is waking up this morning is more valuable to you than $10 million. So what are you going to do with today?
mm.
And that's the question for all of us. We woke up. It's a good day. Now let's make it into a better day. It's up to us to decide if we want to make it a better day.
Boom. That's right indeed. That's right indeed. And I know folks are gonna have a better day after listening to this freaking episode. This episode's definitely been hotter than fish grease indeed. Haven't said that in a few hundred episodes. Well, actually, no, a few dozen. Yeah, a few dozens. few dozen. Yeah, but hey, definitely some good stuff indeed. And the beautiful thing is, we probably only scratched the surface. You probably only got 0.7% of what Dr. Daddy has to offer. So for those who want to scrape a little more and find a little more about you and keep up with your journey, what's the best way for folks to do so?
Oh, you're better than my pimp, Dom. I love it. Thank you so much. As a thank you for everybody listening to me today, I wanted to give everybody a couple of freebies. If you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book I wrote for a school principal who's trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes, start your meeting off with a Dr. Seuss book. And then I'm also going to give everybody access to, last summer, I did a 5-day reading challenge online for about 700 parents from around the world, where every day for an hour, I give you all kinds of ideas on how to get your kid excited about reading. Because the more excited we get kids to read, the more likely they are to read. And the more they read, the better they get. So you can get both of those at freegiftfromdanny.com. And if you have any other questions, you can just go to dannybrassell.com. My last name is really easy to remember how to spell. It's spelled like Brassell. No, I never took any grief over that as a child. But most importantly, Dom, I really want to thank you. And I can't wait to get to Baltimore so we can share a libation of your choice on me together.
Good deal indeed. Good deal indeed. Well, you heard that right, folks. Indeed, my man, Dr. Danny's got the guts for you. That's right, indeed. Help you expand your mind, expand your thinking. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. He's got you covered like a blanket. In this case, 3 of them. If it's still winter somewhere where you're listening to, or whenever you're listening to this, if you're listening to this like 2 years from now, winter, he's got you covered like a blanket. Got you covered like 3, a whole trial, y'all. So check out all of his stuff like a library book. That's right. Check it out like a stack of library books. So, any parting words before I close up shop?
Well, so one of my mentors, Dom, was Charlie Tremendous Jones, and he used to say that you're the same today as you will be in 5 years, except for 2 things: the people you meet and the books you read. So I always advise my students, make sure to surround yourself with people that lift you up, and be wise and fill your mind with lots of really great things. And the thing I've always said to all of my students, whether I'm teaching my little ones or my older ones, is remember, kids, education is valuable, but execution is priceless. Knowledge is not power. Only applied knowledge is power. Knowing what the right thing to do and doing the right thing are 2 very different things. So go out, do the right thing, and make this world a better place.
Thanks a bunch for investing your time by listening to this wonderful podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you really did, do me a solid and leave a review or share this episode with at least 3 people that you think would get some value out of today's content. Advance others to advance yourself.